God Eater is a pretty interesting title, an action RPG set in this anime-like post-apocalyptic futuristic world where humanity fights a desperate battle against a race of monsters named the Aragami. Only the so-called God Eaters, or Ages, including and many of them children, are capable of stopping this said Aragami by wielding biomechanical weapons called God Arcs, ranging from melee weapons, shields, and even guns. God Eater 3 is the newest game in the series, although connected to the rest of the games, you don't necessarily need to play the others to understand what's going on. I for sure didn't. For me, this was my first introduction to the God Eater franchise, and I have many good things to say about the game, but also many bad things. On a brighter note, there was a character creation system here, male or female, at the start of the game. Options weren't plenty, but it does allow you to create your character of your liking, making you feel more attached to it, especially if you're into the anime style of characters. I haven't been for years, but still thought that the overall character design does capture the anime look perfectly. Although it does look a bit off with the rest of the graphics in the game, like the environments. And it could do with far more customization, especially since this style is pretty much open to anything that you could ever imagine. A missed opportunity for sure.
何してんだ。
彼は私の船の乗組員よ。話してはもらえないかしら。
Yeah, there's a lot of that, but that isn't what makes characters great, but their personalities. I mean actual personalities. Anyway, I'll get to there because now I want to talk about the actual gameplay. Fighting monsters is 80% of what you're going to do in this game. In fact, you can compare this to a game like Monster Hunter. Go on missions, kill monsters, and improve your gear, skills, and abilities. But combat and all of its connected systems here are surprisingly complex and deep. Want to wear one of those badass huge anime swords? You can. Prefer a huge mace? Dual-wield swords, a scythe? You can also. The amount of different weapon types and weapons on themselves on each one of those categories is actually insane. Not only that, each and every one of those weapon types have different movesets and combos. Yet on top of that, there's still badass guns that you switch to, as I mentioned before, which on itself has 4 types and a vast number of guns that you can acquire by crafting them as you progress in the game through the missions and alike by obtaining blueprints. The same applies to the melee weapons and even shields. Then with each weapon type, there's also the so-called burst arts, a little abilities that improve your combos and moves, such as your moves on the ground, air, and step, meaning comboing with your dash. Depending on what you wish to equip on your loadout and how many times you use that move, will increase your experience with a set burst art ability, opening the possibility to not only increase the set ability in power, but unlock even more burst arts. On top of all of that, there's still the ability to upgrade the weapon of your choice for a pretty hefty price. The ability to apply these little buffs called instant skills on any of your weapons for passive effects or little effects to each burst art ability, like your air ground slam move now produces this shockwave on top. When it comes to the gun, the same amount of depth applies, but instead of having burst arts, there is bullets with various affixes like fire, frost, divine, or even healing bullets. You even have the ability to customize and create your own and perfect bullet type. But it doesn't end there. There is still 3 other passive buffs that you can equip and that are triggered by meeting certain conditions while in combat, all in order for you to build your perfect loadout suited to your own playstyle. Appearances and armor-based customization is also available but doesn't impact gameplay in any way, shape, or form, purely visual on how you wish your God Eater to look like. As you see from this brief overview, the combat can be quite deep and a little daunting for newcomers. It was for me, but once you get into its mindset and learn what each little thing does, you will want to keep on playing, if not just to upgrade your burst arts and other pieces of gear in order to progress further with your loadout. And all of that progress is not done by grinding XP or mobs, but how you play. The combat itself, when you put all of this in action, will, needless to say, be quite fun. And yes, you can go on about smashing buttons and still get origamis down, but there's also some complexity to be found by maximizing your combos and abilities. Akin to other RPGs, you do have a party of fellow characters that you can sometimes choose who to bring to the missions, all with different abilities. Some might heal, some might be a little bit tanky, others more focused around dealing damage. You can issue out orders while on a mission, although mostly useless as it isn't really needed, or even equip items or buffs on them. The companion system isn't super in-depth, but for the most part you can do whatever with them and they will still do what you want them to do. They are not a pushover when it comes to AI. But once you start slamming monsters with your giant sword or mace or scythe, or jump and dash everywhere, there's complex mechanics such as the Devour and going in burst mode, which requires you to use this specific move called Devour, where a giant mouth appears on your god arcs, so your weapons on your wrists, damaging an origami and allowing you to enter in this burst mode. While in this mode, you will do more damage with your burst arts, and depending how you fare, it can go up in levels. So maintaining the burst mode is the main learning curve of the game, and players can distinguish themselves from other players vastly solely on their use of the burst mode. Resources come somewhat into play as well. Stamina is used for some melee moves along with dashes, OP for your gun, while melee attacking feeds and builds that OP so you can use your gun more often. Most of the time you will run out of stamina not by attacking per se, but if you like me that dashes and uses this charge ability a lot and likes to jump to do the ground slams, I would like to see the stamina taking a bigger role with your attacks, making it more prominent than just something that happens to stun you when you empty from dashing too much. There's also Engage, a fairly similar mode. When fighting nearby AI companions or players, will fill up this circle, and when at max, you can link with each other going into this mode where you deal more damage and receive less. So using these two main mechanics in combination with your preferred loadout and performing your moves properly will be key in order to successfully down the biggest and most badass origami.
私がやることは自分で決める。こっち向きなさいよ、荒神。フィムはその子だけは渡さないんだから。クレア、なぜここに？話は後で。フィムを助けましょう。
The origami visually are amazing. Each type with their own movesets that you need to learn in order to avoid, be with your dashes or blocking with your shield, although the block mechanic freezes you in place and requires two simultaneous button holds to successfully block, making it slightly clunky to use in the heat of battle, which in turn will make you avoid the ability altogether and just reserve to dash away. Only in very small circumstances you will consider blocking attacks. The origami also have these weaknesses, such as weak spots on their bodies or others like elemental weaknesses, and abusing those weaknesses, be with your weapon or gun, will not only make you deal more damage but also break parts of their bodies to stun them and allow you to do even more damage. This is most prominently found on bosses, the most fun and tough enemies to fight against in the game. Abusing those weaknesses and slowly wear down the said bosses, and then combining with a burst and engage moves and mechanics really makes you feel, well, like a monster hunter, or rather an origami god eater. Not that the combat is perfect, it's really fun, but there is issues like the lock-on mechanic isn't as responsive or accurate as it should be. For one, it should lock on specific body parts of the bosses, but it doesn't, rendering it useless if you want to hit a specific spot. It also frequently breaks the lock and sometimes focuses on the wrong target and can be a nightmare to put it back in place. Or how clunky it can be to use your shield, like I said before, or to use your gun. I wish it was snappier, not this change form and then you have to aim properly and then you just smash your X key to shoot. I wish it was snappier, like you press this button and you immediately fire your gun or immediately pop your shield. The same is applied on dodges or dashes. It often locks you in animation as you perform your moves, even a simple attack. So when you see something coming your way, smashing that dodge button won't allow you to move until the end of said animation. In general, I wish it was more responsive in that way. Maybe that's a fault with the game. Maybe that's what the developers intended, but personally, in this action, almost hack-and-slash combat styles, I much rather have that fast responsiveness to my moves and button presses, as I felt countless times that I was pressing dodge, yet I was still locked in my attack animation, and I didn't move as fast as I wanted. The game also employs one of those higher artificial difficulty levels towards the later half of the game by just throwing more enemies at you, and I truly hate when games do this. It doesn't make the game harder, just dumb and unfair. Just stop doing this. Yet on another more negative note, the level design here, the places that you actually go to were extremely uninspiring, bland and generic. And I don't mean the graphical fidelity. Sure, isn't the best for 2019, but it's passable. What I mean is, so much more could have been done in this post-apocalyptic, crazy, sci-fi, monster-infested world, but yet is instance-based, by selecting missions in your base of operations, which is where you can edit your character loadout, use vendors, talk to characters, and where you go on missions. And that's fine. But here we only have a city area, a fire area, an underground area, a frozen area, and so on and on. And not only that, these levels are completely empty. It's just a place for you to go and find monsters. That's it. And not only that, again, they are reused constantly throughout the game. And I don't mean once or twice, but upwards to 3, 4, or even more times. Just the same generic empty levels with just different monsters to kill, neatly placed there without much context. They just happen to be there because you need to kill them to progress your character and move the story forward. What's even weirder is that the story makes it out to be that certain locations are completely new places, yet you have been there 2 or 3 times before. So between the bland and repetitive levels, the only decisions it makes you do is go forward, left, right, or simply follow the red dot for an origami to kill, or these little items spread throughout the rooms for you to loot. It completely wrecks the mystique that the story and lore set around these same monsters. That said, it doesn't mean that the game is short on content. Far from it, as there's a variety of missions that you can go through, albeit all feel a bit similar as it reuses the same old assets and levels. So there's a standard monster hunt missions, assault missions which are focused around a team of 8 players, like actual real players, and operations, following the same idea as the regular missions, but instead of ending and going back to your base, you enter this campfire animation where you can issue minimal commands to your squad and your progress will carry over like your endurance, which is the game's mechanic of offsetting death, giving you these 9 or so lives with each mission. So when you die, you can be resurrected by a teammate or respawn, but that is limited by your endurance. Between that, you also have optional missions or the main story ones that carry the story forward. The assault missions felt the most different of the bunch and quite difficult, but the others, be optional story or even operations, don't do enough to differentiate from each other, all feel very samey. One can argue the goal of this game is just to kill monsters and improve your character and gear, and that's fine, but that doesn't mean that the places that you do it or the way you do it needs to be so simplistic and unexciting. Another area where the game fails somewhat is crafting. Like the overall character customization and progression, it can indeed be very complex, but also feels extremely convoluted. Sure, having all these different materials coming from monsters in order to craft or upgrade your weapons is fun, or hell, your appearance armor is fun to do as well if you went to cosmetics. I spent upwards of 1 hour total just customizing my character and trying to find the materials to build the armor that I liked. But all the different items and different consumables felt a little bit too much, especially since there's very little incentive to use any of them. I think the saying too much doesn't make it better fits perfectly here. But what about the story and characters? Is it any good?
これで仕上げだ。
無茶にも程があんだろう。
みんな出撃の準備を。
了解した。落下した輸送船のコンテナに向かう。
Well, the main story is pretty anime-esque, obviously. It was fine, but the characters, yes, they were great. Even for me that hasn't been into anime for years, I felt compelled and invested by every single character in this game. They just make you want to be around them, all with this vastly different personalities that you just want to know more and more about them and see where their stories will lead. Like the combat, it's definitely a positive for the game. The downsides I see for some is that outside of the main cutscenes, which are great, especially when it breaks full-on anime style, walking around in your base and talking to the characters, which you do have a choice in what you say, it's fairly smoke and mirror choices with no consequences, but there is no voice acting whatsoever outside of the main cutscenes. This is fairly common on Japanese games and some might be put off, but once you get into the game you won't be bothered too much with it. I also recommend setting the voice acting to Japanese to get the proper experience and don't get as many lip sync issues. One actually annoying thing, however, is that the game oddly, in between missions, forces you to go talk to certain characters even if you don't want to, coming up with excuses of how the mission terminal is inactive at the moment. It felt like they were pushing the characters too much and too hard on you, and if I want to do a mission, let me do the mission and just log the main story ones before talking to a certain character. Just a minor frustration. But Fim makes it all better.
フィムが一人でやったの？うん。サプライズ！
The character combats, the overall progression, customization are the real carries of this game and makes you feel engaged and compelled. I almost quit in the beginning, but I'm glad I didn't. It's one of those slow burners that slowly and steadily grow on you, even with all of its issues. However, it felt like such a big slap in the face whenever there's this cutscene of all these characters that you actually care about and they're talking about this huge badass Aragami to kill, and you cannot wait to fight him with your preferred squad members and your loadout and your badass weapon, but when you get there is yet on the same level you've been 4 times already. It was quite frustrating to experience that, breaking my overall experience and immersion with the game. It's also worthy of note that the PC port of the game also performs amazingly. There aren't many options, but the graphics don't really require it, so it's fully playable on a mouse and keyboard, although I would highly advise against that. Being a Japanese port, I think it deserves some praise on that. Actually, most Japanese PC ports now do run beautifully on PC. Great times indeed. So yeah guys, that does it for me for today. As always, thank you for watching and I'll see you all again soon.